Hello everyone, this is Shilpa. I am your host for today's episode on Simplify CXM Podcast. As you all know, we focus on the practical aspects of rolling out successful CX implementations in an organization and seeing a value, the real value out of these programs. So today I'm thrilled to be joined by Shelly Chandler. She's SVP of Customer Experience from Wells Fargo. I met her, I think about three weeks ago in February in one of the conferences for CX in Miami, and I was floored by her panel discussion. What really interested me when it came to Shelley was the amount of experience she brings in CX leadership and rolling out successful programs, and some of the aspects that she touched upon was so interesting. It's very relevant to all my audience, especially ones who are stepping into new CX roles in organizations that may or may not be the biggest of CX supporters. And I feel like Shelley can guide us in a much better way, or at least talk about what works and what doesn't work. So very excited to have you, Shelley. Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Shilpa. It's exciting for me to be here because when I met you at that conference, I recognized a person who really had a passion for what she's doing. I know you do a lot of different things, but it's exciting to meet people in the field who have energy that can give energy to others. And that's what customer experience is all about. It's really a very tight knit community.
Thanks, Shelley. Shelley, why don't we start with a quick introduction of your background, and then we will get to the meat of the discussion.
Great. I can usually explain my background in a couple of ways. I'd say that half of my career was in marketing and product management, and the other half has been in customer experience. But there's been some crossover along the way. I've worked at banks for about 20 years, so a good half of that was banking. And the other part has been in consulting with various brands like Moen, Penske, 3M, Walmart. So as I worked as a consultant on my own and for smaller consulting firms and even a technology firm that sold customer experience software, I had the chance to get outside of banking for a while and really see how the rest of the world operated. But the banking part of my career has been with PNC Bank, with Wachovia, which then turned into Wells Fargo. So I've enjoyed that. It's a very unique and discrete type of space. So customer experience is practiced there in ways that are somewhat different from.
That's fascinating. I mean, you have covered so many industries as you rolled off the company names. Let's get to the do's and don'ts, right? Whenever someone asks me, Shilpa, what do you want to hear first, good news or bad news? I always say bad news because I want to end on a high. So the first question is that I'm going to ask here is, what didn't work for you, right? Like as a new CX leader who joined an organization that may or may not have the right culture into progress CX initiatives. What didn't work for you? Do you have those embarrassing stories of, I shouldn't have done that? And what were the lessons from there?
I have so many stories like that. I think anyone who's been in customer experience for a while has had to have a steep learning curve because the profession has really only been around for about 20 years. And prior to that, sure, there were aspects of it that, were called something different. But I would say a good example of something that you shouldn't do and something that I did was to kind of come in as a consultant know it all when I was on the brand side. So, yes, I was a consultant for 10 plus years. And when I came back to run a CX team to actually build it from the ground up at a company about 4 or 5 years ago, they knew that they wanted to establish a CX function and get as much out of that as they could. But the senior executive team, even though they really didn't understand customer experience, didn't want to be told that they didn't understand that. So, one thing I always remember is my manager would say, and he was the COO, and he would say, Shelly, you're giving us consulting speak again. You sound like a lecturer. When On the other side of things, as a CX consultant, you have to sound that way. So there's a just a sense you have to have of who you're talking to and how you really ought to be talking to them based on what they think about themselves, not what you think about yourself.
That is such a astute observation. The common factor in CX professionals is they're very passionate individuals. They're very passionate about client experience, customer experience, and I think we do get preachy, and I don't think that works in organizations, right? So that's a great
Right.
point. What else have you experienced?
I think I've fallen into at times the common pitfall of speaking my language. So I think because I'm a certified customer experience professional by the CXPA, kind of the most neutral independent body who does those types of certifications, I think that because I'm part of that, that CX is what we say it is, and what we say it is insights to data analysis, actions, change management, organizational change, all of those things. But you'd think would have gotten better over time, but I think it's actually getting worse. The rest of the organization sometimes thinks that customer experience is either customer service, or maybe account management, that's customer experience. And they are parts of customer experience, but it's not the whole thing. So the trap that I fell into early on was probably using those terms and not maybe defining them. But again, back to the preachy point, the consulting point, you have to watch how you do that because you really are educating all the time. So you have to strike the balance of, look, I'm going to teach you how this is because I know it sounds like it's maybe the same example. One specific about that too, Shilpa, is that when you do customer experience and you are starting with insights, because that's what you have to start with, what do our customers say? Sometimes you can get trapped there. So if you just talk about surveys, if you just talk about data, people think that's all you can do. So you always have to link that to higher level business objectives.
I think Shelly, that's an excellent point. And I've actually seen CX teams categorized as customer feedback teams. That's it. Like
Yes.
you provide feedback, you provide the means to survey our customers, but nothing beyond that. And very good point about actually tying it back to business value, especially in today's times. I think there's just been so much news about the CX organizations not doing so well as a profession. So that's really important. Don't get trapped by insights and being categorized as just a feedback team.
One thing I'd like to add to that is that sometimes you don't have the option to not get trapped into that. And add on to what we just discussed is if you think that the role that you're about to accept in customer experience is really just about feedback and surveys, just test your boundaries before you decide to move ahead with that. And if you don't want to be in that box, if you think that maybe more than 75% of the job is going to be just insights and surveys, then you have to decide if you like that, if that's a place where you sit. I've been in roles where I come in and, maybe I'm at that 50 to 75% mark of, wow, it's a lot of this. And that's fine. I like that work. But I know that there's a desire for growth. But what happens is you get pushed into the thing that you have to keep grinding out a lot more than you're able to push boundaries and get into more strategic decisions and things like that. So just just a little word about that is know that you really have to ask a lot of questions before you go into a role that is described as customer experience but could just be customer feedback like you said.
I like that a lot. Any other don'ts before we get to the do's?
Yeah, I think over time you have to learn to immediately grasp, well, over time I have learned to immediately grasp what the business is all about. So part of making sure that your position can be strategic is knowing what are the business objectives, as I said, how is the business sold? So, how are your products sold? This is some of the stuff that I mentioned in the conference where we met. But how do you know really what makes the business turn? So, some organizations are very product based, some are sales based. Some don't have a product, maybe they're a distribution company, and others are service based. So, if you don't learn that very quickly by immersing yourself in it, you will be a lot less valuable. That's another don't. So the do side of that is learn those things immediately along with doing the job that you're doing. It is an expectation that is often unspoken.
That's a great segue to our do's, right? Like, I think, and this is something that I have learned from experience as well. I mentioned this in the conference, which is, as CX professional, our client is our business. Yes, we are bringing in the voice of the customer into these discussions, but to what end? The end is the success of the organization that you're in. So I definitely agree with you. One of the first do's is be in alignment with your business goals and use the voice of the customer to reach them. Eventually, client value equals to business value. So the question really is, if I'm a new CX leader joining an organization, how do I approach my responsibilities so that I'm optimizing my success in the organization?
Well, along with those do's of really understanding how the business runs and what it runs on and what's most important, I think a really important thing is aligning yourself with the right people in the company. And that's part of how you learn. So, companies tend to be pretty hierarchical, I mean, in most cases. So, finding those allies, those thinkers in other areas who understand what you are trying to do and want to understand what you're doing, and then can teach you what they do as well. One example would be where, in one of the cases where I was starting a customer experience team, one of the first kind of internal best friends at work was the chief data officer, because he was trying to build out his division as well. And we had to really partner because we could easily have been pitted against each other. Oh, the data people have the answers. Oh, wait, the customer people have the answers. So we just decided early on to join together and create models together that would show how data was different. Customer data was one thing. So that's needs, emotions, expectations, what customers say, what they feel. And then he was providing, to accompany that, the behavioral stuff. What do customers do? What are their financials? So he could pull all that data together, we could marry it, and then we could do some really great analysis. So finding those allies and those partners that are natural for customer experience is really important out of the gate.
I love that. I think this is building your community of evangelists, right? Like CX needs a lot of evangelism effort in the organization, especially when it is like a large organization, because there's just so much out there. With respect to data, I cannot agree more. I think one of the most powerful things as a CX leader you could do is, at least initially, perhaps, is giving the executive leadership some insights that they had not seen before, like, or the same numbers, but what's a turn on the perspective on what it means from a experience standpoint. And even in my experience, data orgs have been so crucial for the success of that.
Yeah, I think we need to up our data acumen as customer experience professionals. We need to not be afraid to learn how to do pivot charts and VLOOKUPs. That's something that I really kind of avoided for a lot of my career, and I've had to do in this role, and it's painful for me, but it's a good thing to learn. And we also just have to understand how data can be used. So we know how to tell stories, but a lot of times people won't believe the stories about customers that we're telling unless the data can back it up. So unfortunately, we're a more maybe it's not unfortunate, but we're a more data-based world. The quantitative is always going to feel more compelling sometimes than the qualitative, unless you can bring that alive and talk about how then you can go out and validate that qualitative later. Now I'm getting into research terms, but that's a lot of what we do in general is trying to get to a decision. You've got to engage minds, but you ultimately have to engage hearts.
Right. And I also think, and maybe you have faced this or not, and I would love your perspective on this. As a new CX professional in an organization, you are new. Your knowledge base about how the company works, how business works, etc., is like way down there. And then you have a lot of your teams that you're working with telling you, we know what the customer wants, right?
Sure.
um, that could often lead to perceptions about what the customer wants, and the business goes in a certain way. It could also lead to one of the don'ts that you said, which is us preaching like how it should be done. Have you come across scenarios like this, and how did you turn that into a successful situation?
Hmm. Well, I think in the first part of your question, you referenced being a new CX professional, and that I think you have a long distance between a new CX professional and then someone who can sound credible as they're teaching or even preaching. Um, I've come across a couple situations where, as a new person, new to CX, and this has been a while, so I have to dig back, but um, there's a certain level of confidence that you always have to project. So, as a person, you project yourself in a confident way when you have the answers, right? But if you don't have the answers as a new CX professional, I think you can continue to study and network and be mentored by people who do. So, I would say, as a new person, to get to that point where you could be a consultant, maybe you spend the first 5 to 8 years. Really digging into all the specialties. So, for example, one thing I did when I went to Wells Fargo, and I was there for a while, probably about 3.5 years. I realized that I was not going to be able to learn more about customer experience and really get a broad perspective and a broad purview if I didn't leave. So I took steps to leave by getting my master's in organizational leadership, mainly because I could build almost like a consulting curriculum with that major. And I'm also fascinated by the topic. So I did that. And then at the point that I left, I did go into consulting and had that rough transition of, oh boy, now I have to, instead of being the, collaborative internal person, I now have to speak with all this authority as a consultant, but I don't actually know enough yet to really be so very confident. So that's a transition that's tough. But I think as you get to that point, education is certainly one thing. You can do what I did. There are masters now in customer experience. There's one at the University of Michigan. There are a couple others that I think are out there in the United States, and there are some globally as well. But I think really important is finding a mentor to help you get from those early stages to where you can feel comfortable with, just having your own point of view. Those are a couple things.
Yes. So, anyone starting out in CX, I think this is great advice. How about someone joining as a CX leader with tons of experience in an organization that goes, we know what the customer wants? How do you turn that situation around?
Yeah, I get that a lot with product management groups. And I report into a product management group, and I've had the title product manager before, even though I've been in customer experience. And that's a common place for that to happen. We know what the customer wants because we read industry data and we see where technology, for example, is going or where this product may be going. So, because of that, we know what the customer wants. And a lot of times they'll forget that sometimes you need to ask them. Other times you need to it's the difference between stated research and derived research. Other times you need to just get that from them in other ways besides asking, but that's all within the purview of customer experience. So starting with those insights, like I mentioned before, if you can connect to a couple of product managers in this case, in my example, who are really interested in broadening what they know about the entire experience, those are the best partnerships. I have a partnership like that at work that I think is growing in that way, where my colleague and even his manager is getting to the point where my voice is more respected because they know that I'm a student of the business, and I've only been in my role right now for a year. So it's going to take a while to get to the point where I know the product as well as they do, but they know that I know how to get them something to add to what they don't know. That I hope is a good example of, how you combat some of that. I know the answers. What can you add to what I know?
I love that. It's so essentially it is data plus friendships, creating the goodwill. Yeah, creating the goodwill. Um, it makes me think your personal preference. What in a role, which organization would you like to work for as a CX leader? An organization that is they're right there. They understand the importance of investing in experience and client having more client centricity, and actually being serious about weaving it in the fabric of the organization. Or do you prefer turning an organization around that's not into this world, think CX is, a good customer service call and that's it, or sending nice email saying I've got a gift card for you out of nowhere. Which excites you more? What kind of roles excites you more?
They're both exciting in different ways. I've done both, but I've done a lot more of the building. So if you like to build things and you like to, start from the ground up and build the structure, the organization that really doesn't understand or have a customer experience function or thinks it's just a good customer service call, that can be more exciting for you. But you get to a point in some organizations where it's just about polishing the wheel. Like, just the wheel keeps spinning and you're just trying to find ways to make it better. And if the organization really wants to make it better, that would be the most exciting way for me, because hey, I'd rather not fight all the battles all the way to the point where they get it and then want to make it better. So for me, the ideal place would be going into an organization that already has basic customer experience in place, but really wants to take it to a new level and is serious about that. And most importantly, knows that's going to take money. That's where it can fall down, is getting budgets to make the big changes.
100%. What I'm hearing is you love building things, whichever environment gives you the opportunity to do that. That's
Yes.
great. That's great. One final question, and this is my favorite question because this is so rooted in reality. What is one brand that you think does customer experience really, really good? And potentially you could talk about your favorite brand as well and why it's your favorite.
I have a favorite experience with a brand. I can't off the top of my head think about a brand that I just love and use over and over and I'm completely satisfied with. Maybe because I'm in the business and I'm picky that way. Like, you can't go to a restaurant with me, or my son can't anyway, without getting embarrassed and being like, Mom, stop that. Stop trying to make it better. But for me, I had a great experience with Nationwide Insurance, their pet insurance, because I had a very old dog a couple years ago and I had pet insurance for him, thinking it'd probably be his last year of life, and it was. And as I had to file claims as he got sicker, and then when he died, the whole process was just so warm. It was just so, like, they held my hand. An insurance company, they held my hand through it. They made the sign up easy in the first place. So the whole digital application experience was very easy. And then they kept using his name. His name is Boomer. They kept using Boomer's name all the time. And, as I had claims, oh, we're so sorry to hear that Boomer's not feeling well. And then when he died, they sent me some type of commemoration or some like little thing that I could honor his life. And then a year later, they sent something about the anniversaries of his death because we tend to remember things like that. I just couldn't believe that this was, a well-known insurance company that I wouldn't have even expected to do this, but they really got it right that, the way to people's hearts is through their pets. So it was just a great experience.
That is such a beautiful and touching story. Like, and for an insurance company to do that, there is this in general. There's this brand that insurance companies, they can't be more uh, inconvenient if they try to, and you have this experience where it's so human. And what I heard though when you were telling me about the story, it is that they focused on the sentiment, they focused on your feeling as a person, as an individual. And I find that especially in B2B environments, we kind of like ignore that because it's like it's B2B, it's not B2C. And I feel that's not entirely right because you're still working with humans. And imagine a B2B organization giving this kind of experience. Um, that's a beautiful example. I'm very, very impressed. And kudos to, you said national
Nationwide.
insurance? Nationwide insurance. Yeah. Awesome, awesome. This has been great, Shelley. I love the discussion. I think I've got many nuggets, especially if both for if you're starting off as a new CX professional or you're starting off as a CX leader in a new organization. I guess what I carried was don't be preachy. Don't start off with, oh, you're doing this wrong. No one wants to hear that. And don't ignore the business value that CX can bring. But so what you instead do is one, get yourself up there, understanding what are the business, what value does the business want to generate. Get closer to their revenue goals, get closer to how they sell, what they sell, and all that fun stuff. And then get on to looking at the data while creating some really good partners and friendships in the organization. So there is the evangelism. I always tell this, CX's role generally is influencing without authority. And what you said, the three steps are really how you will create that influence without having direct authority on all these teams that are meant to take your recommendations. So thank you so much. This was a pleasure.
Oh, you're welcome. And that was a wonderful summary. I'm impressed. I can tell that you work in the space and that you have experienced some of this yourself.
Thanks, Shelley. We'll speak soon
Thank
again.
you.
Bye.